Welcome to another roundtable webinar. We have a great one for you today. It's a panel roundtable as part of our DevOps Unbound series, which is sponsored by Tricentis. And today's topic is DevEverythingOps. I'm going to jump into that in just a minute, but I wanted to take a moment for some housekeeping. For most of you joining using the GoToWebinar webinar system, you're going to see your GoToWebinar control panel in your upper right-hand corner. I just want to call out two things in the control panel for you today. Number one, this is a roundtable webinar. It's not going to be slideware and watching slides. It's going to be an active discussion, and you, our audience, are part of that active discussion. So I want to call your attention to the section of the control panel marked questions. And I'm going to ask you to click on that little arrow or caret to make it downward facing and expand the question section. You'll see that you can type your questions in there. We're not saving questions for the end. We're going to ask questions in real time. We'll work them in. So as your question pops into your mind, please type it in there. We'll get it to our panel, to our audience. We'll see what the consensus is and we'll discuss it. So questions for our panel about DevEverythingOps, please put them into the question section on the control panel, and we'll do our best to answer them. I next want to call your attention down to the bottom of the control panel where you'll see another section marked chat. Here at MediaOps, we use our chat sessions if you're having any technical issues. So if the audio is dragging or a video dropped or something happened, but you can still get to that chat session, we do have people standing by to help you. We want you to get as much as you can out of these webinars. So please, if you have a technical issue, type it in the chat section. Someone will help you. If you have a question for our panel, type it in the question section. We'll get it done. So that's it on housekeeping. Let me now introduce you to our panel here today. And I'm pumped that we were able to get these people. It's an amazing panel. Some really, this is going to be a great discussion. Let me introduce you first. I'm looking at it on my control panel. I'm going to go left to right. First, I want to introduce you to Mitch Ashley. Mitchell is CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group. Mitchell, introduce yourself, a little background.
Yes, yeah, I come to this both as a CIO as well as a product CEO, CTO. So kind of been on both sides of the adoption curve. So I'm excited to talk with Caroline and Jane and Wolfgang and you and Anders. It's a great panel.
Thanks, Mitch. Next is the CEO of the DevOps Institute, my friend Jane Grohl. Jane, welcome. A little background.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Grohl. As Alan said, I'm CEO of the DevOps Institute. We're a global member association where, at least as of today, membership is free. So I hope everybody will join. You know, I come from the ops side. I was an IT director for a long time and had the privilege of getting to know DevOps starting in around 2012. So it's really been fascinating watching the rise. And then, of course, Alan and I are co-founders of DevOps Institute. So again, like Mitch, really excited about today's panel.
Next, we have Anders Wahlgren of CloudBees. And Anders, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Anders Wahlgren from CloudBees. Been with CloudBees for about coming up on 18 months now as the VP of Technology Strategy. Before that, I was Chief Technical Officer at Electric Cloud for about 15 years. Before then, we were acquired by CloudBees. And these are my people. These are my favorite people to hang out and talk and be nerdy with. So looking forward to the hour today.
Fantastic. Next, we have our Chief Strategy Officer contingent. We have not one, but two Chief Strategy Officers today. First is our founder of Tricentis and Chief Strategy Officer, Wolfgang Kandick. Wolfgang, a little background.
Yeah, hi. My name is Wolfgang Platz. I'm, as you already mentioned.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. That's okay. Founder, Chief Strategy Officer of Tricentis. Tricentis being the number one company in the software testing space. So I will certainly bring a bit of my perspective, my experience in the software testing space into this panel as a substitute of everything here. And super excited to be with you guys. And let's make it a great hour for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. And last but not least, also Chief Strategy Officer, my friend Caroline Wong. Caroline, a little background on Cobalt perhaps, and you?
Yes, hello, Caroline Wong, Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt.io, where we build security software. So like a lot of DevOps companies, we've got data-driven, product-based teams. We value automation and failing fast. One could say that I've spent the past 15 years as a DevSecOps professional, although we used to simply call it InfoSec. I started off my security career at eBay and Zynga. In both cases, companies that were running online operations 24/7 with millions of simultaneous users daily. So always thrilled to have an opportunity to participate in these types of discussions.
Thank you. Okay, we're already starting to get questions from our audience, and we're going to get to them. But I want to throw it out there for you all right off the bat and say, you know, we call this DevEverythingOps. What is this DevEverythingOps? What do we mean by that? What does it mean to you, right? When we say DevEverythingOps or DevXOps, I've seen it as well. You know, Jane, I'm going to ask you to kind of kick off. What's with DevEverythingOps?
So I look at DevOps perhaps a little differently than other people. So I'll just tell you my definition and why I think it is DevEverythingOps. And I'm going to use an analogy, and the analogy is going to be pizza. So it's 9 o'clock in the morning. We're not eating pizza today, but for argument's sake, let's say that we are. I look at DevOps as a recipe. So if you think about your recipe for pizza, I'm going to make everybody hungry. My recipe and your recipe are really different, but at its heart, DevOps is a set of principles. And so I think we've kind of diluted the definition so that's why we have DevSecOps, Biz, all of that, but that's part of the recipe, right? A recipe in and of itself has no value. It's writing on a piece of paper, on a tablet, or something else, but it is a proportion of the ingredients that go into that recipe, the quality of the ingredients that go into that recipe, and the proportion of those ingredients that go into that recipe, and of course the skill of the person making the recipe. So if you think of DevOps in that perspective, again, in and of itself, it's a set of principles. We need, you know, very, very pervasive testing. We need security. We need the business. We need, you know, CI/CD pipelines. We need, you know, containers. We need all that. And so for each organization, your pizza, my pizza may be different, but it is the quality of that pizza is really going. Pizza in and of itself has no value, right? It's Alan, we're from New York, right? Pizza in and of itself has no value. But if you look at the recipe for your DevOps, I think that everything that goes into it is going to be, first of all, there's going to be some standards, right? But it's also going to be very dependent on the quality, proportion, and the skill of the person making the recipe. So hopefully you're all now hungry for pizza.
Never think of pizza again the same way.
Everything pizza, right? There you go.
Yeah. How about anyone else on the panel? Any thoughts, comment, follow up on that?
I like that point of view on it, and not just because it's 6 o'clock here and I'm still thinking of pizza. I mean, to me, it's kind of the big tent metaphor, right? It's you know, kind of being inclusive of all the functions and all the stakeholders that are involved, you know, starting from ideation all the way to when, you know, the value is in the customer's hands and working properly, safely, securely, all of those things. And you know, so I think it's, you know, we started with DevOps, you know, in this moniker, and then we've been sort of gradually inserting everything in between, and I'm fine with that. I mean, I think it's one of those things where if that brings attention to a particular area, if it's for a while or if it's for a long time, I think that's great. You know, DevSecOps is probably the one that we hear a lot these days, and I think that's, you know, completely legitimate. And I think it's good because I think that fosters discussion about what are the roles of the various stakeholders and how can we make these things easier and better and make the, you know, the right way the default way and all those things. I'm kind of in favor of all these changing of that word, changing of that phrase, and evolving it and talking about those things, because I think that's what DevOps is talking about all the things that are involved and doing all the things that are involved to get the software out the door.
You know, to build on that, Anders, you know, I've asked my spouse if she could get me some cold pizza, so we'll have that in a minute. But anyway, a non-food analogy, I think it's very much like Agile. You hear about Agile business and all kinds of uses of the word Agile. And to me, what it means is there's some principles behind that, behind Agile, that apply. And people can see that in their own domain, their own work domain. Same for DevOps. The whole bringing ops into the aspect of the business that you're in and integrating groups together. I think that's why it's applicable. So that to me is a sign, not only have we had effect on the development organization, it's affecting the whole company.
Anybody else before I'm, go ahead, Wolfgang.
So, yeah, sure. I think when I want to come up with a different analogy here, which is about building a house. All right. When DevOps is okay, development, you build a house for a certain purpose, you want to then operate it. But when you do this, you want to also make sure that it's really going to work. And this brings me back to the stakeholders. You want to make sure that all the different stakeholders are involved. First of all, in order to really make it work, you want to test the functionality because houses tend to be different. The one house is different from another house, and you want to have this check of functionality. On the other hand, you also want to make sure that people can really be safe in there. So meaning if you are not here for a week or so, you want to make sure that there's no one breaking into your house, right? And you're going to find your house safe when you come back. And in addition to that, it's all about customers, of course, right? You cannot build a house neglecting the needs of the ones who should live in there. We want to have all these guys on board. And the developers per se, they have a very progressive mindset, a very mindset pointing towards the need of the in the end game, the functionality in order to be provided to have somebody live a good life in there. But that might not be comprehensive enough. It's very focused on the end product, but there are aspects you tend to not have a very clear picture on. And these additional elements need to be brought into the space. Security is growing 35% per year, as you know. It needs to be brought into the space for good reason, because there are offenses. Software testing is a super relevant aspect because, yes, we know that the complexity of these buildings is increasing, and when you change something in the basement, you want to make sure that your top floor is not crumbling, right? So all these things together make up the building that you want to deliver to your business.
So
Caroline?
I think that words really matter, and I really like DevEverythingOps. I think there's an acknowledgement, as folks have said, particularly Wolfgang, that it's not just customers that matter, it's not just engineers that matter, it's not just engineering and ops. I'd actually love to take Jane's analogy and kind of zoom way out for a moment and think about the butchers and the dairy farmers and the chefs and the distribution of the folks who, harvest and provide the tomatoes to the grocery outlets. I think we've seen this shift in software development from waterfall, where you have gates, Agile, where you do it all faster, and then DevOps, where you do it faster together and all the time. And you've got this network of interconnected folks collaborating and working toward a common goal in a continuous, iterative manner. So really love Jane's analogy of the pizza. And I think you can actually zoom out and imagine all of these different processes happening in an ongoing, continuous, and sort of iterative way.
It's all about the supply chain. I think that's a great analogy.
I mean, you can take Wolfgang's house, and it's the people chopping down the trees in the forest and preparing the lumber and making the nails and all the other, elements of what's building in a house. Let me just play devil's advocate though, because that's how I am. So, I remember when I started DevOps.com about 7 years ago, and coming like Caroline from the security side of things, the term DevSecOps was treated as blasphemy. by many in the DevOps community. I had, when I first did the first RSA DevSecOps event, I had Gene Kim and Josh Corman and some other folks there. There was a tremendous pushback from the DevOps community, because they said, it's DevOps. There is no small DevOps, enterprise DevOps. There is no startup DevOps. There is no test DevOps. There is no security. It's DevOps, and there's just one DevOps. And anything else is superfluous. It's not part of it. And yet there was another contingent, call them the ultra orthodox DevOps crowd, who really said, if we wanted to call it DevSecOps, we would have called it DevSecOps. If we wanted to put test in there, we would have said DevTestOps. But we didn't. We called it DevOps because it's about dev and ops, and that's what it's about. It's not about all these other things. Now, fast forward 7 years, and here we are having this discussion. If I asked some of those people back then to come forward now, I don't know if they would have changed their minds or not. I think certainly the market has become more encompassing and forgiving. But at its heart, is it still just DevOps, right? Is everything we're talking about just DevOps? Are we taking core DevOps and just kind of watering it down or applying it out to all of these other disciplines? And I think that I think that's what it is. I'm going to bring in a quick question. So Dev, whatever ops is the next step in evolution of the convergence of all these development strategies. Agree or disagree? Anders, Wolfgang, what do you think?
I mean, a lot of these are philosophical topics, right? I mean, and even bordering on religion sometimes, right? When you get down to how we define these things, ultra orthodox as you sort of brought in there. But I think it ultimately it's about it. I had a very eye-opening moment probably about 3 or 4 years ago at one of the DevOps Enterprise shows, where a gentleman got up in a lunch panel that I was on and said, "Look, we keep talking about dev and we keep talking about ops, but let's not forget when we're doing these things, you've got HR, you've got finance, you've got you've got everybody in the whole organization that has to kind of help operate and do these. This was a discussion under the kind of the digital transformation umbrella, but it was very much one of those things where that opened my eyes to, yeah, you're right. If you're really going to make DevOps work, you can't just focus on Dev and Ops. You're not going to be able to change how you're doing things if I'll just put it sort of somewhat strongly, if you ignore the rest of the world other than Dev and Ops, you're not going to succeed. And to me, that was when I shifted and said, okay, I don't care what you put in the middle between Dev and Ops. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that we get the job done and do it right. And if we have to change definitions to do that, I'm fine with that. So.
Excellent.
I think
I'm good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think all big changes, all new things happen at a certain spot, and there are areas that are more often subject to these changes and triggering these changes than others. Development is an area where a lot of change has been initiated. I would say that that all the frustration with development and the waterfall times have at the very end triggered this great Agile movement. And then people found out, wait a minute, dev is not enough, right? It's just too short-sighted. And so we must not stop with dev. We want to go further. We want to have also a clear perspective on the ones who should consume the software. And so we want to have operations included into this. And then it's DevOps, right? And now we say, but now this is enough, right? Don't do anything else. No, DevOps, it's just DevOps. Come on, guys. It's not just DevOps. It's more than that. It's more than that. Call it whatever. I don't care. As long as you don't forget about as long as you don't forget about having a decent software testing in there, as long as you don't forget about security, as long as you talk to the business people, I'm fine, right? I don't want to go into religious debates here. As a matter of fact, you want to have all the stakeholders on board. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And to the religious fundamentalists, I got to tell these guys, don't close your eyes. See what's going on in the market. We have seen Agile 1, people struggling with that. Their Scrum 1 is crumbling, right? Now they're going for Scrum 2. And don't educate me that it doesn't make a difference whether you implement this in a small one team thingy or you implement it in an enterprise. It's simply not true. It's a complete different ballgame whether it's just 3 people cooperating or 300 or 3,000, right? It is different. It makes things more complex. People act differently on a one-to-one basis than they operate in a big body. It is a fact. So let's face that. Let's make sure that the merits of this approach of agility and DevOps are suitable even to big organizations, and let's stop educating on purified ideas and ideologies and stuff, right? So sorry for being so blunt here.
No, it's great. As the CEO of DevOps Institute. I'm sorry, we're getting a little feedback in here. So maybe someone can mute. As the CEO of DevOps Institute, you kind of have a gravitas here in what is, on this question of what is DevOps and what is not DevOps, right? So I'm going to ask you to put your official DOI hat on now and weigh in.
So, I mean, isn't everything we're talking about really the human aspects of DevOps, right? So, there's kind of these multiple factions where there's the belief that you could get to DevOps purely through automation or purely through humans. And the reality is it's the combination of the two. But everything we're talking about, is it a cry from the humans to make sure they're counted, to make sure that what they're doing is important, that as DevOps has risen to be something that's become a global phenomenon, let's not forget about security. Let's not forget about testing. Let's not forget about the business. Let's not forget about the humans. And so what we don't want is that we don't want it to be religious, but we also don't want it to be political, where the reason we're looking at DevBizSecOps, on the DevOps, on the DevSecOps side, there's a faction that wants to call it SecDevOps. I was on a conversation with a fairly large organization recently that absolutely wants to invest in SecDevOps because they feel security has to be the stronger. And maybe that's so. But there is a human kind of an emotional piece of this that I think we'd be really remiss if we weren't addressing the fact that, call it whatever you want. It's IT. We don't call it BizDevSecOps IT, right? It's IT. It's a new way of approaching IT. Going back to Wolfgang and Agile, think about the origins of the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto was born because there were a bunch of very, very frustrated developers that were feeling that the complexity of what they were being asked to do was really overwhelming what they were trying to achieve. And that was very human, right? It was very, very human, long time, but very human. So I think that when we start to look at this, step away from the religion, if this becomes religious, we're in trouble. I saw that with ITIL. Right, where ITIL actually did become open book one, look at chapter and verse, and the market in many ways lost a lot of the spirit of what's being offered. This becomes religious, that's really dangerous. If it becomes political, that's really dangerous. If it becomes really human, DevOps Institute, our mission is to advance the human elements of DevOps, and we take that very seriously. If this doesn't remain human, or we don't acknowledge that it is humans that are going to really drive the transformation, I think we won't be able to succeed, and it will become one of those really nice things, that happened earlier in this millennium that ended up reverting back to the same old. So,
Yeah. On the issue of complexity, we've got a Mark from the audience wrote it's a long question, so I'm going to ask you to bear with me as I read it. Modern enterprise systems are multi-architecture, multi-platform, multi-products that have hundreds of thousands of interrelated things that are constantly being updated. How do you start digitizing the DevOps ecosystem so that more knowledge can be systematically provided to product teams that only have a perspective of a very small part of the system, so they can understand the context of what they're working in? And this is part of the DevEverythingOps. We could say we're doing DevEverythingOps and it's everything, but each of us work on a piece, right? It's hard to see that whole picture. How does sec fit in? How does, where do we put the test in? And we're always talking about things like shift left, but how, this is a hugely complex ecosystem, from the people growing trees to chopping them down and making lumber, to the carpenter who bangs the nails in, to someone who paints the house and sheetrocks, right? There's so many pieces. How do you coordinate this complex ecosystem if we're going to call that DevEverythingOps, right?
So I've got a suggestion, Alan, and I think we can actually take something. So I've got a 5-year-old. She's about to start kindergarten remotely in a couple of weeks. And what's going to happen is there's going to be this combination of asynchronous and synchronous learning. And I actually think that we can take this into the workplace. I think we already have. I want to provide the example of a recent company kickoff. Normally, the whole team would get together, the whole Cobalt team in Berlin every summer. And instead what we did it virtually. And part of what we normally do is all of the department heads get up on stage and they say, here's my strategy, here are my commitments, because it's an accountability exercise and it's also a transparency exercise. Now, the way that we did that in a virtual setting, because we didn't want to have folks sitting in front of their computer screens for 8 hours a day, was we actually had folks record video ahead of time, and we assigned homework. And we said, everyone watch these short videos. And then what you do when you get together is we actually split out into breakout rooms, and you have booth style Q&A, so that you're able to both optimize the transparency and the information sharing, as well as start some discussion around it. So I actually think the biggest thing is a little bit of data organization, which could be boring and unsexy, but is actually super duper important to keep track of your inventories, as well as a culture of transparency and information sharing. This is something that I've seen wildly shift in the security community over the past decade or so. Security used to be this kind of like, oh, you buy your threat intelligence solution and only 3 people in the company ever have access to that data, which arguably you'd actually maybe make more use of your threat intelligence data if you shared it more broadly. And I see that happening today. So I do think that that's an important cultural shift to not only get your data organized, which is not sexy, but it's really important, but also to do information sharing and like ultra transparency.
Excellent. So
Awesome.
let's move the discussion. So whether we want to call it or not, DevEverythingOps is a thing. It's real, right? Caroline, you hit on some ways of dealing with it. At all of your organizations, and Mitchell, you speak to many organizations, as does Jane, Anders and Wolfgang, you work at 2 of the leading DevOps related, whether it be test organizations in the world. How do you do DevEverythingOps? How do we, what are the biggest challenges and how are you working with them?
So if I may start, first of all, let me before I come to this, let me comment on Caroline's statement a bit.
Sure.
I would have a question for you, Caroline. How many of those people really consume the videos up front, except for you?
Yeah, no, that's a super good question. And to be totally honest, I was really worried that nobody was going to watch the videos. So there's a couple of things at play here that I experienced when we did this. One thing is, you get an executive up on a stage, you can see it with us, frankly. Everyone's going to talk for 30 minutes. You get them to record a video, and they have to record it on their own machine, and they have to produce it. It's only going to be 5 minutes long. So there is actually, I think, an efficiency that's gained that has to do with the nature of recording video of oneself. The other thing that I was really surprised at, I really thought that no one was going to watch the videos, and they totally watched the videos. And I think that actually has to do not with the setup that we did in July, but actually what we did way ahead of time. In January, we were able to get the whole company together all as a person in San Francisco. And I expect that we were actually able to leverage those connections and that trust. And so I think it can't be sort of a one-time thing where you expect folks to do things. There's got to be a culture of accountability. So I do think that that's going to differ in various places, but I think there are ways of putting folks on the spot, making them accountable so that the cultural expectation becomes you're going to watch these five-minute videos.
So why did I ask? Because I think one of the greatest challenges that we're facing with Agile development and with Scrum is that the picture that they have regarding developers is idealistic. And I was coming to that. I was asking myself whether your expectation that people would even consume this upfront came true, because it might be too idealistic. It might be too much expecting people to contribute. So why do I point this out? Some of the assumptions of Agile development. Unfortunately, I'm having an echo here. Every once in a while. Whatever that is.
And it might be coming from you because I see you lighting up green.
Yeah, now I had it from you also. Okay. It's still here. Let me try to keep going. So whenever people have this very idealistic picture of human beings and try to use that as a basis of processes and approaches, I think it's very dangerous, right? So one of the key ideas of Agile development was everybody is here to each and every day produce great software. And this is the one mission that everybody has. I mean, it's simply not true. Face it, if you have 100 developers, 20 of that will be like this, right? How about the other 80? The other 80, they may have a bad day and not be as idealistic on that particular day, and just be normal developers producing something, right? And let the day go by. That's fine. So, and I think you gotta be very aware of who you're working with in order to get the real results. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be able to have this one super team perform in Agile development and smashing it out and be better than 100 others could ever be. That's going to happen, but that's going to be an exception. Face it. So when you ask me, how do we do testing? We do testing in a very pragmatic flavor. We set up testing in a way where we try to acknowledge that, yes, doing manual testing repeatedly is super boring, okay? Face it, try to automate these things. If you go for manual testing, then do it in a way that it's more thrilling, then it needs to be exploration, okay? Otherwise, it's not gonna work. Make sure you accept how human beings are in order to make it work. We try to provide a very comprehensive flavor of the different approaches that we use for software testing in order to make do with all the people that are around, and not just these 2-3% experts here that might be that might really be ideal. Okay.
Fair enough. Anders, what about you? I mean, in your role, you've been involved over the years in so many different aspects of this. I mean, what do you think? I do think the issue can become one of complexity, frankly. But Anders,
I'm glad you used that word, because I think that's what it is. And the only way I know how to manage complexity is abstraction. If I had to worry about whether the transistors in my computer are edge triggered or level triggered or any of those sorts of things, I would never get any work done. And so I think a lot of this, I'm kind of going back to Mark's question on multi-platform, multi-architecture, multi-product, multi-team, multi. Levels of abstraction are really the only way to do this. And I think that's incredibly important, and kind of going both to what Caroline and what Wolfgang talked about in terms of you think you have, sometimes we think we have a sort of a uniform body of people, developers, and they think this way and they do this and they do that. Well, these are individuals. Some of them, come to work, write their code, go home because they care about their family more than they care about their job. Other people are incredibly passionate and think, about their job 24/7, which isn't necessarily healthy either. So you're always going to have different, amounts of take up on any strategy, any communication, any sort of things that you're trying to get done. And if you are constantly having to explain all the way down to the transistor level how everything is supposed to fit together and work, you're going to drown, right? You're going to drown as soon as you're not writing calculator or notepad, you're going to drown. And so levels of abstraction are incredibly powerful for this. And that's one of the reasons why loosely coupled architectures and microservices are so useful, because they put these levels of abstraction. And now you still have the problem of, okay, this team works on that service. How do they know how they fit into the overall picture? So, it doesn't absolve you from the responsibility of communicating architecture, purpose, strategy, challenges, opportunities, all of those kinds of things. But without abstraction, we are completely drowned. So my answer always to that is where you can fit in the abstractions, whether you do it in terms of APIs or explanations or analogies or what have you. Those are the places where you start to get a leg up on the complexity and the big, kind of managing the big pieces that we have to manage. That's easy answer to a very complicated question, obviously, but.
Mitchell?
I like where you were going, Anders, because all of this to me represents this is actually an area where we do a lot of research around software delivery and tying the business and the technical organizations together. As software is elevated and become more of an essential ingredient of business strategies, digital transformation, all that kind of thing, the organization is much more reliant. In fact, they're betting the farm on their organization's ability to deliver software to themselves through third parties, et cetera. At the same time, like in some of our research, one of the number one kind of things that gets in the way of really adopting DevOps and the organization working together is silos. That's been true forever. And it's still about people working together. And I think something that can help, and this question that was asked kind of hints maybe a little bit at it. A while back, somebody showed me or told me the phrase, we work in the business, we have to also work on the business. And that is, how do we work on what we do? And organizations outside of IT are very data-driven. You go into marketing, product management, finance, all kinds of organizations are extremely data-driven. Oftentimes IT isn't. But we now have a tool landscape, a software landscape, and architecture that's throwing off data exhaust. Lots of data about what we're doing and also what people are doing with our software. That if we can start to learn how to harness some of that, I think it can elevate, I hate to speak too grandiosely here, but I think it could help IT start to tie itself back to the metrics and the KPIs of the business that matter, instead of being the organization that's dragging us down or being slow or whatever, sort of stereotype from the past. And that's part of that working on the business. And this whole idea of all these architectures and multiple tools and software, et cetera. To manage all that, we need data. And I think if we can use that data in a productive way with the rest of the business and tie ourselves, use it to connect ourselves, that would be a healthy thing to work on.
Yeah, we've had plenty of success, although lots of work to be done still in terms of kind of tearing down the cultural barriers and some of the silos between organizations. What we haven't succeeded at yet, but I think we're all working on, is making sure that we don't end up with a bunch of data silos, right? We've got, developers have their tools and QA has their tools, testing, ops, security, support, everybody has their own tools with a bunch of data in there. And what we really want to do is start to be able to ask and answer questions across those data silos. I think that's a challenge that we have on the vendor side of the industry, is to do a better job at pulling all of those things together.
I'd like to jump in. So first of all, I think a lot of what you guys are talking about, and it goes right to the heart of what DOI is all about, which is the human element, right? We can't lose sight of the fact that we could talk about QA and we could talk about security and we could talk about data, but it's humans and how they interact with it that we need to keep track of. I think one of the things that was really great about Agile and Scrum was the idea of your Scrum team being a manageable team, right? We didn't have this huge monstrosity. It was a manageable team. I think, I think it was the Spotify model in DevOps, right? With squads, right? Squads. And these squads allowed us, it said you can, I forgot it was 7 or 11. 7 or 11. Right, of people within a squad. I think the problem is it's okay to talk about DevEverythingOps up here at an organizational level. And when we get it down to the human level, to the team level, humans just, the complexity, as the team gets larger, the complexity compounds. And I think that is where, where you butt heads, where this DevEverythingOps kind of notion has trouble finding traction at that small team level. Now, I think one of the other issues, quite frankly, is with DevOps, instead of, yes, there's data silos, but we throw too much on the dev, right? The dev's going to do more testing, right? Wolfgang, I know at Tricentis, this is probably, I've spoken to Grigori about it. We keep throwing more on the dev. DevSecOps, we're going to shift security left and throw more security responsibility at those devs because they're the one working on it, right? The devs are human people, human beings. How much, and they've got a pretty hard job developing. How much more do we put on devs? How do we equal the load among our testing professionals, our security people who are underrepresented in the big thing? If DevEverythingOps is going to work, we need to figure that out. So interested in thoughts on that one.
Yeah, so I think we got to be honest on what we need to demand from our developers, and we don't want to be too overarchingly demanding. Compare it with a soccer team, right? You have at the very front, you have the Ronaldos and the Messis and guys who are here to shoot the goals, and then you have midfield and you have defense. So what do you expect from a developer? From a developer, I want to have offense. I want to have them run and shoot the goals, and I want to, of course, they need to have some prep from the midfield, right? So some architecture is also required. But do I really expect from them to be the greatest defenders on earth? I mean, if you focus if you focus on defense too much, you're going to break the offensive spirit of these guys, right? I mean, that doesn't prevent us from providing defense, but you have, somebody else is going to do that, and they're going to do it better because their entire mindset is defense. So if it's test as a defense discipline or it's security as a defense discipline, there are experts to do that make sure that you guys in midfield and in offense can perform to the extent possible. Then we're going to win the world championship. If I want Ronaldo to be a defensive soccer player, it's not going to work out. So that's the way I look at it.
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
So just, as we're talking about this, a couple of thoughts come to mind. First of all, one of the things that, whether it's DevOps or DevEverythingOps, that we're encouraging is systems thinking. And so everything that we're sharing here really does require us to elevate the way that we think more than even the way that we behave. And we have to all learn to become systems thinkers, whether you're a developer, whether you're an operations person, whether you're a CIO, we all need to be able to look at the whole system. And truthfully, growing up in IT, we didn't grow ourselves up that way. We grew ourselves up with blinders that we took care of a certain aspect of that. So I think systems thinking, design thinking is very important. And I think that's also one of the reasons why value stream mapping, value stream management is starting to gain the popularity that it is, because we could take DevEverythingOps, look at the value stream not as a flow chart, but look at it as, here are all the essential elements that go back into the systems. Here's how long it takes to do it, but here's also the delays or the amount of time between these activities, and we can map Mike Orson, who's pretty well known in the lean space, says that one of the best things to do with a value stream map is to socialize it, right? To get that kind of human interaction, to help people see the end-to-end system so that they can see, first of all, that they're a part of it, and that includes the business, but they can see that they're a part of it. They can also see what elements, for example, Wolfgang, you're talking about testing, Caroline, with security, you know, that whole shift left movement requires a very, very different mentality, right? That before it was somebody else's problem, now it's everybody's responsibility. So I think that changes it. And Alan, just to go back to pizza, it's a 2-pizza team. So Jim, you were going, is it 7 or 9? It's the old 2-pizza team, right? You should never have a team that can eat 2 pizzas. So that's
the Amazon model, exactly. The Jeff Bezos. Yep.
And systems thinking, value stream management, I think have started to really rise to the forefront, because that's how we're going to solve this problem. And everything that's involved in that is going to hopefully be represented and not underrepresented in those solutions.
And I think we should point out too, I think that, you know, when we say shift left, a lot of times that gets interpreted as dev will do it, right? And I think that feeds in a little bit to the myth of the full stack developer, and that, you know, in order for us to succeed at software, our developers have to be security experts, they have to be quality experts, they have to be user experience experts, ops experts, all of these things. And that's kind of as far from the truth of reality as you could possibly get. You know, you want full stack teams, full stack organizations, and the supermen and superwomen who kind of can range all over the place are typically great systems thinkers and so on. But anytime you set things up requiring or expecting that your developers will do everything under the sun, and that's what shift left means, as opposed to, you know, do it earlier and do it often, which is the way I think about it. You're setting yourself up for failure there, and you're not going to be able to staff that organization with the superhumans the way you think you are. So you're gonna meet reality pretty hard on that way.
And what a waste it would be, right? Because see, you have somebody who is perfect in 3 disciplines. Okay, if I use this person just for one thing, I'm not making use of 2 elements where this person is perfect in. What a waste! We want to make sure that people can perform where they're best at, and not try to throw everything on them. It's just a waste.
And, you know, on top of that, Wolfgang, what we pay developers today, right? And I don't begrudge them what they're making, but I have friends who are CIOs, CTOs, and they're paying developers $250,000 a year or more because they're a good developer. To go have them doing, and I don't mean this in a bad, you know, disparaging way, but to have them doing security or testing or some of the other things rather than developing, which they are amazing at, what a waste of money and talent and time.
Correct,
right?
correct. See, Ronaldo makes 200 million a year, right?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
any
You put him
defense
in
player
goalie.
who is close to that? Anyone in defense? I mean, nobody
No.
is close to that, and for good reason. It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not sound fair, but it is.
That's the reality. But there's a flip side, and Jeff from our audience brought this up in the questions section, which is, you know, we haven't discussed SREs. So are SREs a way for operations to kind of even the load with the developer a little bit, take some of that load off and handle it, you know, in that traditional maybe ops way, and we call it SREs. Thoughts on SREs, Jane? I know you guys recently did a skill up day on SRE, and thoughts on that?
So I'm a little passionate about SRE coming from the ops space because I think it broadens operations, but I also think it brings us continuous operations much earlier. And again, when we start to look at the rise of SRE and the history behind it, I think it's pretty fascinating because it didn't grow up as part of DevOps. Right? We didn't coin SRE because somebody in the DevOps space thought of, wow, I think we ought to include operations in this. So I do think SRE offloads some of the the work on the developers. In some ways, I think it adds additional work for the developers, because the classic definition of SRE is what happens when a software engineer tackles operations, right? So there we go. We're still in the developer space. But I guess I would throw it out to everybody, whether it's SRE. Isn't everybody at some point today a developer? And so if we take away the classic definition of a software engineer, it doesn't everybody in that value stream. I'm not a coder, right? I've never been a coder, but little kids are learning Python, right? So I think, SREs are learning Python. I think that an engagement very early from an SRE, from an SRE team has really kind of changed the dynamic of who self-identifies as a developer and who self-identifies as operations now.
Carolyn, what about security? Can we have security SREs? I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I have a broader response. And one of the cool things about my chief strategy officer role at Cobalt is that I actually oversee cybersecurity as well as people, which is what we use to describe human resources. And that's very unusual. And as I listen to this, several things occur to me. One of them is I am so reminded of that character in the Phoenix Project, the one individual who can sort of do everything and is sort of forced into doing everything and is burning out. Right. And I think there's an organizational strategy opportunity, if you will, to identify who are the high value contributors in the organization. Now, we've all been parts of organizations where engineers are gods, or sales are gods, or, pick your preferred business department. In my opinion, that doesn't work. I don't think it actually works to devalue any particular role in an organization. And I think that is where the politics comes in. I think that politics is a natural outcome of human beings getting together. Anytime you have more than 3 individuals together, you're going to naturally have politics, and that's okay. I think that one of the coolest things, and this is a strange thing to say, but one of the coolest things about being a human resources professional is that I have a lot of influence in terms of who we hire and who we fire. And what that means is that we as an organization and our hiring managers have an opportunity to examine, do the candidates that we interview and do the folks that we bring on board and have as a part of our team, do they actually live our company values? And our values don't include putting one department or another on a pedestal and having everyone else be subservient to them. So I think that if you're in a situation like that, and that is extraordinarily common, then you've got to think about how to work around it. I think if you have an opportunity to consider the organizational design, and maybe if there are folks who are stealing the spotlight when they're not supposed to, you address that behavior. It's not a simple fix, but I think it's an important one. I'm a big fan of this book called Sapiens. And this book, Sapiens, talks about this concept, which others I'm sure are familiar with, Dunbar's number. The idea that you can sort of ensure consistency of values and behaviors between individuals via one-to-one relationships until a group reaches about 100. Which is to say, it's a lot easier to manage a group of less than 100 people than it is to manage a group of more than 100 people. When you get to more than 100 people, these things can't simply be managed via one-to-one relationships anymore. They have to be documented. They have to be instituted. One of the things that we do is an every 6-month performance review that includes both expectations for an individual's department and role level, as well as an evaluation, including peer feedback, of demonstration of company values. And that's something we take extremely seriously. We've let company executives go because they were not demonstrating company values. And I like to think that that's one of the reasons why we've been able to support a truly collaborative culture, and not one where we say it's collaborative, but where we actually value one person way more than another.
That's great. And that is almost DevOps. Wolfgang, you founded Tricentis. You were there when you were less than 100 people. I know you're well over 100 now, right? Caroline's experience to your experience in building the organization here, trying to keep that DevOps culture, if you will, that culture of being agile, maybe with a small a, not a big A, but whatever. What do you think?
Yeah, when I look back, actually, there were several steps that changed the company entirely. Several thresholds, not just the 100 and 100 plus, but there are some below, right? Until 20, you're like family, but then becoming more than 20, the family spirit kind of erodes. I would say the next step is about 80 or so, and or 100, somewhere in that ballpark, and then things change again. Regarding the agile spirit, I think that's also very much related to the complexity topic that you have addressed earlier. I think we always want to, even if we grow an organization, still have areas of family spirit going, not then producing silos. Yeah, you mentioned the silo issue, Mitch, right? But still have some family spirit going. I think that is super relevant, and even and the idea of agile with teams actually supports that spirit. But what we also need to be very cautious is that these families do not produce their own little islands, which all of a sudden become little fiefdoms and tend to build their own walls around them and do not interact with the company anymore. I've seen this in our own organization.
Oh, right.
So we always need to also make sure that we have some, so to say, apologies for my word, disturb the systems, right? Like make sure that some exchange is always going in order to make sure we do not run into this fiefdom phenomenon. I personally think that while I fully respect the relevance of each and every employee, we need to be aware that some employees are more critical than others. It is the blunt truth. It is just a fact. Otherwise, we will also lose great talent. It is a fact, especially in software development. As you know, the capabilities of software developers spread by magnitudes, and you would still not fire somebody. If somebody has a 10x output, you would still not fire the one with a 1x output. That's the way it scales here. And fortunately, we do not fully represent this inequality in payments. Of course we don't, right? By far not. Mm-hmm. But we want to be aware, because it's going to be your A players that make you win, nobody else. And it's always stunning to me how little extraordinary people in a company it takes to win. And if you can go up to Google, you can go up to the largest company on the planet, and you're going to find just 15, 20 extraordinary people who run the ship, right? Or 8, or even 8. Yeah. So it's just not true that there is no difference. There is huge difference, but we want to make sure that somehow we can orchestrate all the strings. Sorry for the long answer.
No, it's fine. It goes back to the humans, right? It's a human element thing, and I think humans, everyone should have a minimum level of respect, responsibility, but we also have to realize that in our societies and in our jobs, some people do better than others at their jobs, and that's okay. And theoretically, their compensation is somehow tied into that. Guys, we're almost out of time. First of all, I want to just thank each of you. Mitch Ashley from Accelerated Strategies Group, Anders Wahlgren from CloudBees, Jane Grohl from the Humans over at the DevOps Institute, Wolfgang Platz, founder, Chief Strategy Officer, Tricentis, and also thanks Tricentis for sponsoring today. We can't do this without sponsors, so many thanks to Tricentis. And last but not least, certainly my good friend Caroline Wong, Caroline, Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt.io. One quick question, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, for our audience, if they want to find out more about DevEverythingOps, a book, a paper, a presentation, somewhere to go where they can go find out more. Caroline, I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Sure. I've got a couple. One is State of Penetration Testing 2020. Another is A Practitioner's Guide to Application Security, which I've also shared in the chat.
Fantastic. Wolfgang?
I have come up with a book on enterprise continuous testing. I would very selfishly recommend you to read it. It's, I think, just like 3 to 4 hours to go through, but it's going to give you a very comprehensive overview about what continuous testing in the DevOps space means.
Thank you. Anders?
I think the DevOps handbook is a wonderful resource, and I keep going back to that one for kind of inspiration and nuggets of goodness. So I recommend that one.
Mitch?
You know what, I'm not saying this for self-serving purposes, but there actually are a number of articles on DevOps.com. I think some going back as early as like 2017, 18. Check those out, because I think that shows some of the evolution of the thinking around this, and that context is helpful.
Last but not least, Jane.
So DevOps Institute has introduced a set of new collaborative body of knowledge known as playbooks. And the first one is the DevOps journey. And so it's very non-traditional. It looks at where you are and how you play in this. So go up to the DevOps Institute website, become a free member. The DevOps Journey Playbook is a curation as well as some thought leadership, and embraces some of the content that some of you have already mentioned.
Great. Hey, just real quick, every webinar we do here, we always give out Amazon gift cards. So we've got a couple of winners, Cliff F, Dean C, Janet B, and Randall S. Our team will reach out to you and get you your Amazon gift cards. Thanks for participating. My panel, what a great panel. We'll come back, we'll do this again. Similar topic, we can talk all day on these. Thank you so much. Thank everyone for attending. If you're watching this on demand, sorry you weren't able to participate in the Q&A. Maybe you'll catch us on the next one in about a month. But for now, this is Alan Schimmel from MediaOps. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great day. We're out.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.